Afternoon, I'm Colonel Lincoln Farish, as always, with my trusty Peace Pipe Tomahawk. So, I already talked about sovereignty in the collection of sovereignty, governance, and legitimacy. This slideshow presentation will be on governance and the how and why and how that is important to you as a civil affairs officer. Let's get to it. Governance. All right, remember, these are my thoughts. This is not endorsed by the U.S. Army, the U.S. government, DOD, USCAPOC, or SWIC. All right, let's talk some definitions. Now, JP 3-24, which is counterinsurgency, defines governance as the state's ability to serve the citizens through the rules, process, and behavior by which interests are articulated, resources are managed, and powers exercised in society, including representative participatory decision-making processes typically guaranteed under inclusive constitutional authority. Now, if you look at the old 3-57 from 2019, it defines governance as pertaining to creating, resourcing, managing, and sustaining the institutions and processes that govern, protect, and bring prosperity to a society. This discipline includes civil affairs specialists in public administration, environmental management, and public safety areas. Sometimes it's handy to look at old doctrine and manuals to get a broader view of terms and concepts, expand your TTPs. While no longer doctrine, out-of-date manuals can be a goldmine of information. So as you can see, you've got some pretty big encompassing ideas of definition. Personally, I think that governance is a little more narrow. So in the new 3-57, there's not a definition of governance, but there is a handy graphic showing government functions specialty areas and the explanation of who has the skills to assist with governance issues. That's right, Reserve CA has the skills. Our active brethren have minimal capabilities in these areas, which makes sense. Active component gets there quickly, stops the bleeding. Reserve takes a bit longer to mobilize, but has the skills to effect more permanent solutions. So now that we've heard of the official doctrine, and if you take a college class, you'll find governance consists of 15 to 20 odd different activities, which is all important, but may be overly complex for the situation in a war-torn region, and you need to start off a bit more basic. Here's what I say is necessary to affect the most basic level of governance. So governance, you need four things: a leader, a code or a set of rules, enforcement of the rules from them, and enforcement of rules against each other, and a way to distinguish us from them. Now, that's not good governance, but that's enough governance to allow for trade. So, how are my four things enough for governance? It's the minimum necessary to allow for trade and for people to interact with each other without always resorting to violence. And so, how's that enough? So, rules and enforcement of those rules set the stage for trade and person-to-person interaction. No one likes a cheater, not at 5, not at 50. If everyone knows the rules and the rules are enforced, this allows multiple iterations of interaction, which builds trust and the desire to continue that interaction. Without trade, there's no economy of scale. Everyone has to individually produce everything necessary for day-to-day survival. Without trade, you have subsistence level at the hunter-gatherer stage. All right, so what about anarchy? Anarchism holds the state to be undesirable, unnecessary, or harmful. Anarchism also entails opposing authority, of hierarchical organization, and the conduct of all human relations, including, yet not limited to, the state system. Sounds good, but the reality is that anarchist collectives or communes are small and dependent on a superior entity, not only to protect them, but to enforce civil interaction. Feel free to look up Freetown Christianity or Exarchia, neither of which are anarchistic anymore. Often, anarchy is co-opted by individuals trying to set up a communist-style authoritarian state, gather together the disaffected, promise them a stateless society, then seize power. If you get rid of or fail to enforce a criminal code, you get the strong make the laws, or they seize power and set themselves up as a ruling elite. The best case there with Lord Humongous. If you get rid of civil codes, you get societal collapse. In Virginia, the laws are called statutes, which are grouped together into titles. There are about 67 different titles, only one of which is for criminal activities, referred to as crimes and offenses generally. One title for criminal statutes. What about the rest, the other 66? It's all about regulations, how people interact with each other legally. It defines what is or is not something. As an example, what percentage of whole milk is fat? If you don't have a definition of whole milk, a standard, inspectors, and testing established, how do you know what you're drinking is milk and not chalk water? What about the requirements to be called a doctor, a dentist, or a lawyer? If you buy a nail listed as a 10-penny nail, what size nail do you get? Who defines that size and enforces that decision? Who enforces contracts? Caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. Without civil codes and governance that anarchy supposedly eschews, there is very little trust, and one spends a lot of time verifying what they bought is what was promised at sale. If you buy a soda at 7-Eleven, you're pretty sure that you'll not get sick, and if you do, there's a mechanism in place to right the wrong and ensure it doesn't happen again. Without governance, it's one against all. And that is why you get societal collapse. Civil codes are just as, if not more important than criminal codes. All right, so back to the 4 things you need for governance. The first one is a leader. Someone has to be in charge, usually one person. Conceptually, it could be a committee or the like, but that slows down the decision-making process and can result in decision paralysis. Now, the leader may have subordinates to help enforce his will, but in the end, there has to be one. All right, rules. You got to have rules. All right, so one of the greatest moments in governance was the end result of the War of the 12 Tables in about 450 BC. The Roman plebeians, the common folks, forced the Roman patricians, the rulers, to write the laws down. No longer could the elite interpret the law. It was written down for all to see. And of course, the second is obviously the Declaration of Independence. Every person is equal under the law and has natural rights, not just those given by the government. Now, obviously, the rules can be written or oral. The advantage, obviously, with written rules is less room for interpretation by malevolent elites. All right, so a uniform. I say a uniform because it's a way to tell us from them who is within the group, who's outside of the group. It's a way to visually describe a role or an occupation. It's a way to include and exclude. All right, enforcement of rules are there to protect the populace from themselves, but also from outsiders. Governance? Well, transitional governance is a core competency and supports civil administration and transitional military authority are civil affairs missions. All right, so civil affairs and governance, according to DODD 2000.13, civil affairs operations includes activities that establish civil security, provide support to governance, provide essential services, support economic development and infrastructure, and establish civil control for civil populations in occupied or liberated areas until such control can be returned to the civilian or non-U.S. military authority. The DoD must maintain the capability to conduct a broad range of civil affairs operations necessary to support DoD missions and to meet DoD component responsibilities to the civil sector in the operational environment across the range of military operations. All right, so according to FM 3-57, the new one, section 1-17, transitional governance is a core competency of civil affairs forces, essential for maintaining stability in periods of competition, promoting resilience in periods of crisis, and ensuring continuity of governance during armed conflict. CA soldiers are trained, educated, and organized to support or execute the functions of a civil administration. All right, so SCA and TMA are civil affairs missions. With support to civil authorities, CA forces execute to provide assistance to a governing body or civil structure of a foreign country according to international agreements as part of a disaster response or following armed conflict. This fulfills their requirement for enhancing, enabling, and providing governance. And then transitional military authority. It's the temporary military government exercising the functions of a civil administration in the absence of a legitimate civil authority. All right, just in case anyone wondered what is support to civil administration, it's assistance given to a governing body of a foreign country. Now, support to civil administration occurs when military forces support Department of State in the implementation of interim civil authority or U.S. foreign policy in support of international defense and development. It supports diplomatic, informational, military, and economic instruments of national power. Administration, also known as governance. So what's the minimum needed? According to me, a leader, a code or a set of rules, enforcement of the rules, and the ability to protect us from them and from each other, in a way to distinguish us from them. Now, that's the very, very, very absolute minimum. But with that, you now can have movement towards good and legitimate governance. Hope everyone enjoyed that. So, as usual, I'm making a book recommendation, The Rule of the Clan by Mark Weiner, Weiner, and basically it breaks down how tribal structures work from a governance and other perspective. Kind of an interesting way that you can compare and contrast and see how in places that don't have strong national governments, sometimes organizations of people will come in to fill the gap. All right, so that was governance. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.